What is it? Doctor, what's wrong? What's the matter?
Okay, Rich, are you back with us?
I am.
Wow, so I mean, that's really tense, scary, gruesome stuff.
It's unsettling. And I think, there are still a couple of people out there that maintain, we used to get quite a few, it's trailed off now since we've got an FAQ up and things like that, but we did used to get the odd email from people saying, why have they cut all of the gory stuff out on the DVD, or why have they cut this out, or and it's a completely unique effect that the show had, just by having characters say things, because that's that particular scene, that phone-in call is really heinous, and there's one earlier on with Craig Charles where there's people talking in a park about a mutilated dog, and you never see anything in Ghostwatch like that. The closest you get to gore is finger scratches, really. Mm-hmm. And yet people, because of this sort of blanket ban, or however you want to call it, the fact that it was never repeated and took 10 years to get on DVD and all the rest of it, people have just made up their own scenes in their head. And I'm not surprised at all that people get confused.
It's the power of suggestion, right? Okay, I'm going to have Lesley on the other call here, or the other line. I'm going to try to add her into the call here. We're doing our own Ghostwatch here. We're trusting technology again.
Hello.
You never see.
Hi, Lesley. Turn your computer down.
Yeah.
Lesley, thanks very much for coming on the show. We're, as I'm sure you know already, we're speaking to Rich about Behind the Curtain, the Ghostwatch documentary. Tell us a wee bit about yourself now, just before we bring you in the conversation.
It's a poltergeist.
It's a poltergeist. Rich, can you still hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I think Leslie's having some issues with her Skype at the minute.
Oh, okay. Do you want me to sign out and maybe that'll clear up the connection?
No, it's grand. We'll keep going. Lesley, sure, hopefully your connection will come. And she'll... Lesley, can you hear us?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, can you turn your computer down, sorry, in the background, or your radio?
Okay, is that better?
Yes, that's much better now. You're coming through loud and clear.
Okay.
You're talking to Marc and Jay here in the studio. Thank you very much for taking the time to come on the show.
No problem at all. My pleasure.
Now, tell us, Lesley. We've been speaking to Rich already. Tell us a wee bit about yourself and how you came to be involved in this documentary.
In the documentary, Behind the Curtains.
Yes.
As you know, I was the original director of Ghostwatch.
Yes.
So, and Rich has been a lifelong fan of Ghostwatch. So I think I'm sure he'll tell you himself, but for many years he's been circling making a documentary about the programme. Mm-hmm. And Stephen Falk introduced me to Rich, and we started to talk about it and hatch plans. Originally, we tried to get people alongside to back it, but in the end, we just thought it was a better plan to just make it.
Okay. Now, going back to the original Ghostwatch itself from 1992, Lesley, tell us a wee bit about directing it, because the one thing that I remembered from watching it the first time was that so many people didn't realise that this was a drama made for TV. A lot of people, Jay likened it earlier on to the War of the Worlds, to H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, the Orwell radio broadcast, or Orson Welles radio broadcast, where a lot of people thought that this was the real deal, that they were watching something that was really, really happening. Obviously, that was something that you set out to do.
Not strictly speaking. I actually just took the script and I just tried desperately hard to realise it from the inside out. So it was a TV, it was written as a TV programme. So I just, I tried to be completely faithful to TV language. Mm-hmm. And we actually came through film department, so there was quite a bit of pressure not to do that. There was a bit of pressure to make it on film and to make it much more dramatic. But I was very keen to make it as realistic as possible and as much like the TV programs of the day, or even more so, actually, because we tried to use every trick in the book.
Mm-hmm. Now, Rich, I'm sure you know this, and Lesley, of course, you know this as well. It's one of these things, it's kind of almost become part of urban legend. It's one of those things that keeps getting taken up in conversation whenever people are talking about ghost stories or strange things that happen on TV. But it keeps coming back. That must be really, really exciting. And Rich, no doubt that's one of the things that drew you, as such a fan to want to get this out here to the people again.
Frankly, it was therapy as far as I was concerned for me. I watched it. I was 7 years old that night. I watched it with my folks and had the perfect kind of safety blanket because, and I say this in the documentary, funnily enough, but my old man was just tearing it to pieces as soon as it came on, saying, he knew where the wires were, he knew, and all the little tricks. And my mother, conversely, was looking at it from a completely different angle, which was she was able to ascertain which parts were scripted and which were impromptu. So I was this sort of, simple 7-year-old kid in the middle of it, completely swept up in the drama. I thought it was really fascinating, but in all honesty, I didn't think it was particularly scary that evening. It was a couple of weeks later that I started to embellish it, if you will, and which, as I say, a lot of people have done, as there was no real internet back then, aside from just the burgeoning message boards. Teletext really, or magazines, was the best that you had. So there was a lot of room for people to make up their own real connective tissue between that, which is what led to this disparity. For me, the most exciting thing was probably late 90s, early 2000s. There was a guy called Stephen Freestone who set up a website called ghostwatch.info, which was the first real online presence for Ghostwatch. It had, and everyone started to gravitate towards it and just send in stories. And I remember thinking, this is really great. And then the website just disappeared. And many, many years later, after I'd finished college and all the rest of it, I was just sort of a struggling writer and not really getting anywhere, in all honesty. And I remember just having this epiphany, thinking, just drop the ego. And, I'd been getting sort of reasonable feedback for stuff, but it wasn't leading anywhere. So I thought, well, just ask someone who knows what they're talking about. And I did a web search. The first name that came up was Stephen Volk, which is a little talk, and just said, why hasn't anyone made a documentary about Ghostwatch? And he said, I've no idea, so let's go for it. And it was very interesting. The first few months, we got very, very far indeed. Certainly, with me going to meetings and talking to people and potential broadcasters and all the rest of it, and everyone wanted to change my idea in some way. They either wanted it to be about me and not the show, or to focus on one particular element, and I wanted to do a more kind of comprehensive, certainly fan-based thing. And as Lesley said, after a few years, we just said, we got together. I think it was at the British Library. We just had a drink and said, let's do this ourselves. Let's do it our way and have it be a real indie picture. And that was the most exciting for me.
Okay, now Lesley, you're still involved very much in TV and doing a lot of shows. But does Ghostwatch? We speak very often on the show. We have a lot of sort of actors and writers and people that come on the show. And it's funny. Some people embrace certain things that everybody remembers them for. Some people, they resent it. But to you, does Ghostwatch keep coming up to you? Is it sort of that thing that everybody remembers you for? Or is it a good thing? Do you welcome that, if you know what I mean? Or is it sort of, do you ever get to the point where you're like, can I move on from this?
No, I don't feel like that at all. It was such a huge piece of work. It broke so many molds at the time while we're making it. Never mind how it was received. Mm-hmm. It was a fantastic piece to work on in that aspect. Trying to get realistic performances, trying to sort of break your own understanding of drama and bring it back down to realism. So for me, it was a brilliant journey into my own dramatic language. So no, I never feel like that about it at all.
Okay. One of the things about it that I remember is that, Halloween now is probably a bigger event than it ever has been, where, with costumes and fireworks and, there's so many decorations now and people make a big deal of it. But yet and all, come Halloween night, there's nothing good on television to watch. They very rarely even play horror movies now, or, but that was I remember it being a big event on TV, and it was the last time they've done that. What way was it received when it came out originally? Did people resent it, or were they very much into it? Is it one of those sort of things that with time it has resurged, or how was it received on the actual night?
Are you talking about the BBC or the public?
Well, let's go with the public first, and then we'll talk about the BBC as well. But I mean, because as I say, I remember it being very, very scary. I remember my parents watching it and being very baffled by it. To me, it was kind of the original sort of Blair Witch kind of idea. But how did the people? What was the reception like afterwards?
Well, it was sort of extraordinary. It was a bit like a car crash. We didn't. I mean, Stephen and I were quite bemused by it, really, because the sort of point of the whole piece was totally buried in the shock. So it was. I mean, Sarah Green got sort of doorstepped by the press. There was a week of tabloid coverage, which then they kept going as much as possible. It was very visceral, the reaction. Mm-hmm. Mainly, I think, because they thought that, Auntie had broken faith with the nation. I think it was just BBC was dressed in something different.
Okay. Now, talking about the BBC, what was the reception like in-house to it then?
Well, we don't know because it was just a black hole. So they just shut the doors and shut up. And nobody mentioned it again, ever.
Wow. Okay.
Was it one of the first BBC programmes to actually get a judicial review into a single programme?
Quite possibly, yes.
Do you think is that? Well, it probably is. Is that most likely one of the reasons that the BBC were just kind of shocked and awed by the? I mean, there was quite a high viewing figure, but the public response as well was quite negative as well, wasn't it? Because they just didn't seem to get the fact it was drama at the time.
I'm not sure. Well, I would defend that the public view was negative. I think. Yeah, no, I'd slightly defend that the public view was negative because I think it was fairly mixed. There was as many people saying they loved it as there was sort of brouhaha in the press. So it's difficult to actually say, I think.
Yeah, so it was probably, sorry, from my hindsight, it's probably more the press reaction rather than viewer reaction that I can kind of recollect.
Yeah. No, I think the press did take umbrage. I think they felt like the keepers for the people.
Yeah, I think the fact that it was aired in a drama slot, it had writing credit at the start, it was after the watershed, there was enough disclaimer there to maybe let people know that it may not be, one, it's not fact, and two, you might not want minors to watch it.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because some of the letters that Ruth Baumgarten, the producer, got afterwards, there was so many different levels of confusion and understanding. People would write in and say, of course, it was a drama. It was so obvious it was only real when the police arrived, which obviously wasn't, which was drama as well. So there just seemed to be hundreds of levels. But I think it's something to do with if you believed it and then discovered it was drama, you felt duped. And I think that was a big fan for the anger. Mm-hmm. I think there was some, complex layers going on there.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, maybe it was one of those programs that was ahead of its time in some ways, but also it wouldn't have worked at any other time. I mean, you couldn't do a program like that in the internet age.
No.
But I don't remember, and it may be because I don't know enough, but I don't recall any other program, especially on the BBC, that had a High Court review and, claims, whether they were founded or unfounded, about post-traumatic stress caused by a single program. So that has to be a moment of its time. There probably will never be another program that can have that sort of, I don't know if it's fame or infamy or whatever, because it was still a stunningly good program, and obviously people are talking about it 20 years later.
Yeah. No, I hope that's all true.
Rich, we'll bring you in a wee bit on this as well. Another thing that I remember about the show as well, and Leslie, obviously yourself, is that there was a lot of scenes in it where, because I remember watching it, I was just sort of in my early teens, I think it was just sort of 12, 13 at the time, and I was watching it with my parents, and there were certain scenes in it where they thought they'd seen something, it was like, was there something there? And, the other one would be like, no, there wasn't. And it did sort of get into your, it got into your sort of your conscious a little bit. It messed with your mind very slightly. Did you experience that? Is that part of what you remember about it?
This goes back to my parents again, because I may have been too young to really get that I was only 7 myself, but I do recall both of them saying at certain points, that wasn't there a minute ago, or and it almost became like a game. There are 8 moments